So this is module 5. We're going to walk through the process of adding data components to our web pages. So once again, I'm starting at the Power Pages homepage. I'm going to choose Edit. I'm going to go into my site, into the Design Workspace or Design Studio. And this time what we're going to do is we're going to recap. We're going to create a new web page, and this is going to be where we're going to allow our suppliers to log in and edit those order records that we made earlier. I'm going to create a new page. I'm going to give this a name, machine order details. We're going to remove the add page to the main navigation, and we're going to explain why in a little bit, but basically we're not going to want our users to navigate directly there. We're going to choose the start from blank. I'm going to hit add, and this is going to create the new web page, and this is just recapping what we did earlier. So here I'm going to, once I've created this page, we're going to add a new heading. I'm going to choose text. I'm going to choose heading 1. And we're going to call this order details. And now what I want to do is add a spacer in between here. And now we're going to add a form component. Now, what's going to happen is, if depending on where you are, you're going to see the Copilot come up with this. We're not going to use the Copilot today because we already have the table created. We know what our form is already created in the data workspace. So we can start with that instead. I'm going to choose a new form here instead, scrolling down, and this is the table I'm going to use. As once again, it's machine orders, and then the form, we're going to choose that supplier form. Now remember, in our last module we modified that supplier form in the data workspace, and we're going to create a name here for the supplier form. Now what I like to do is, because we're going to be using this form to update, I actually want to put in the word update or edit, because we also might be later on creating a supplier form that's create. So in Power Pages there are different form modes, and we're going to take a look at that next. So I'm going to go on to here in our data, and whereas in a model driven app a form can create, it can read, it can edit, in Power Pages a Power Pages form can only either create or edit or be read only. So we have different things here. So in this case, we're going to be updating an existing record because our suppliers are going to be logging in and updating orders that were made in the Canvas app. So we're just going to leave this at update existing record. The other thing I'm going to do here is I'm also going to turn off the captchas, and that's just to make things a little bit easier as we go through this, so you don't have to struggle with the captchas. Of course, you'd probably want to consider turning these on if it's like a form to collect details, especially from anonymous users, so your site doesn't get hit by bots. And we just click OK. And of course, we see our form appear on the page, pretty much how we had it set up before. And that's pretty much step 2. So pretty straightforward so far, right? Okay, now let's move on to the next task where we're going to create a list. So we're going to create a new page again. And this time we're going to keep that page on the main navigation, and we're just going to call that machine orders. And again, we're going to add a new heading here, and we're going to call this machine orders. Pretty straightforward. Let's add a spacer component, and then we can go further and add a list. Now again, we're going to have this pop-up button, so let's choose a table. Again, we're going to choose machine orders. We're going to pick our data views, and I'm just going to choose active machine orders. Pretty straightforward. That view already existed when that table was created in the previous, I believe, Power Apps in a Day. And we're good here. We're going to basically now go to row actions. And what we want to do is choose the edit record, because this is where we want to choose what happens when we want to edit the record. Now we could choose a form, but this time I'm going to choose a web page, and I'm going to go into the machine order details, and that's the page we created with the form earlier. So if you see what's happening here, we're using the list to navigate into that machine order details form. If we just left the form, our users wouldn't know what record, or the system wouldn't know what record to view. So by seeing the list of records, now the user can choose that and then navigate into the form and make those edits. So we've created that, and now we see just a preview, so we don't actually see any real data on our site. Now, if we were to preview this, and we can hit preview here, go to our desktop, you'll notice we don't have permission to view these records. That's because we've yet to configure any table permissions. Now, this is something with Power Pages. You do not have access to any data until you set up table permissions. It's not a case of you have to go back later to turn them on. So this is how security works in Power Pages. You'll need to implement that security. So we're going to need to go back to the Design Studio. So I'm back in the Design Studio here, and I'm in the list. You see I have this little permissions button here, or I also have this set the permissions on the list. Either or, we're going to click this, and we're going to get this side table permission. Now it's already chosen a name. It's also chosen the table, which is cool. And also the next thing is global access. That's great. We're going to choose read, write, and append to. And then in terms of roles, we're going to choose authenticated users. So let's just break down this a little bit. What we're doing here is, this is the name of our table that we're looking at. Our global access type is global access, meaning it's all being accessed for everyone that we specify. So it's not tied to a contact or an account. We'll talk about that in a bit. And here are the permissions. We're going to choose read, write, and append to, meaning we're going to allow these records or other data to be appended to these records. And then in terms of web roles, there's a couple of default web roles here. I choose authenticated users. That means all the users to that authenticate into Power Pages. Now let's hit save. All right, we've now created this. Now once again, let's hit preview. Let's go desktop. And again, we still don't have permission to view these records. And that's because we're not signed in. If you remember that we had set it for authenticated users. So I'm going to need to sign in, and I'm going to choose here an external account, Azure AD, because this has already been enabled. We may get permissions required, that's fine. So now we're going to be automatically directed to our profile page. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a fake name here, good old Bob Roberts, Bob at Test, and we're just going to update the profile here. And now, because we've logged in with an authenticated user, we now see our list of machine orders. Taking this one step further, we can go in and choose edit, and we can update things like the supplier order ID and the estimated ship date. And just hit submit. And now we've updated that particular record. We look at the machine orders, and once again, we see here we have the estimated ship date. So in just a matter of a few clicks, we've created a couple web pages. We've tied this directly to Dataverse. We've set up security. And this is actually pretty simple in terms of configuring the entire Power Pages web application. So a couple things here that you might be wondering. The fact that Bob Roberts was an authenticated user and he saw all of the different coffee orders here and was able to go in and update them. In a real world sense, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Bob might represent a particular supplier, but not all the suppliers. Probably Contoso Coffee has multiple suppliers logging into their portal, so how can we begin to segregate all of these different suppliers such that they only see the data that they're allowed to see? Well, the great thing with Power Pages and Dataverse and table permissions, we can combine those three things and make that a possibility. Let's dive in and see how. So once again, I'm in my design workspace or design studio. I'm going to go into the data workspace, and of course that's where we're modifying the Dataverse tables. I have the machine order here. I'm going to go into the forms and go into my supplier form. And again, remember, this is the model-driven app form that's sort of used as the foundation template for our Power Pages form that we added to our website earlier. But of course, any changes we make here would be reflected there as well. So what I want to do now is I want to go add field, and I'm going to this time add the actual supplier lookup field, and we're going to add that just under comments. So there we've now added our supplier field, and let's just hit save and publish. So now that we've done this, I want to go to the setup. We need to modify. So now we want to go into the setup workspace, and we want to modify the table permissions. So we already have the table permission for our active machine orders. We want to go in here. We're going to change the access type to account. And basically we're saying only people that belong to a specific account can view the records that are related to that account. And how do we set up that relationship? Well, we have this drop down here, and then we see that relationship between me, machine orders, and suppliers. So that's what's going to be used to filter visibility to those records. So we're going to hit save there. And now that we've done that, we can go back and let's preview our site to see what happens with those new permissions modified. And even though we're logged in as Bob Roberts, we now see there are no records to display because Bob Roberts doesn't necessarily belong to any supplier account that is linked to those particular machine order records. So we're going to need to do a little bit more work for Bob to be able to go in and update those supplier records that belong to his particular company. So I'm now once again back in the Power Pages homepage. Now I'm going to go into solutions, and we're going to actually use our model driven app to update our order records and assign those to specific suppliers. So I'm going to go into my Pages in a Day solution, and under apps I'm going to choose our apps, and let's go into our model driven Contoso Coffee Supply Management app. Let's just select that and then hit play. And then now that we're into our machine orders, let's just go into a record here and let's actually update this to a supplier. We don't have any suppliers found currently, so what I'm actually going to do is I'll just create a brand new one, and I'm going to hit new account, and let's just call this Fabricam. That's great. Hit save and close, and we've now made Fabricam our supplier for this particular order. I can go back to my other orders and I could assign another one to Fabricam, or I can go to the next one and let's assign this to a completely different supplier. Let's actually choose this to Contoso International. All right. So now we've created an account and we're going to assign this. So now all of our order records are assigned, or sorry, all our machine order records are now assigned to different suppliers. So now that we've updated our machine order records, let's actually update the contact that we've logged in with such that they'll be able to see only the records they are meant to see. So every time you create a user in Power Pages, whether that be through the Active Directory or some other authentication provider, or even the forms-based one, it's basically going to create a contact record. So I'm going to go into the data workspace and I'm going to find the contact table. And here we're going to see a whole list of names. So here's my Bob Roberts in company name. I'm now going to edit this. I'm going to edit row using the form, and under the account name I'm going to choose Fabricam, and I'm just going to save and close this. So now that particular contact is updated and is currently considered part of that Fabricam order. So remember last time we set up our table permissions such that only the machine orders could be viewed by the particular users that belong to a specific account. Seems like a bit of a mouthful, but now let's go back to our pages and we're going to choose preview. And once again, we're logged in as Bob Roberts. I'm going to choose the machine orders table, or page rather. And now we see that those are the two records. And we know that there was 3 machine orders in our system, but Bob Roberts has only visibility to these 2 particular records in our Power Pages site because of the table configuration of table permissions relating to the account record. It was a little bit complicated, but hopefully you can see that relationship and how that security can be used to be applied to make sure the data within your Power Pages site is secure. Now, if I were to go in and let's update this, and I'm going to put in, once again, put in a supplier order ID and put in a ship date. Now let's hit submit. Now we're getting an error message that the form could not be submitted for the following reasons. We don't have the appropriate permissions. That's because even though we have permissions to the order details table, we don't have permissions to link this to the accounts table. So we're going to need to go in and modify the permission such that we can have that we can attach orders to a particular supplier. So once again, I'm in the Design Studio. I'm going to go to Setup and I'm going to choose Child Table Permissions. I'm going to go into the Active Permissions, and this time I'm going to choose Child Permissions, and I'm going to choose a new child permission. And we're going to base this on the account table, so we can call this whatever you want. I'm going to call this Machine Orders Supplier. Table, we're going to choose Account. And it's going to give us our default relationships. There's only one, that's good. And then this time we're going to want to be able to read, write, and append, meaning we're going to be allowed to attach orders, attach this supplier to as a supplier to our particular order record. We don't need to fill in the roles because it is linked up to our parent permission, which is active machine orders. Let's just hit save. And we see here we have the little arrow here and we have that child permission. Let's try to preview again and see how far we get. Okay, I'm going to go in machine orders. And then once again, let's try to edit this one. Put in the order ID and the date. And now submit, see what happens. And there we have the submission or completed successfully because we've configured those table permissions. All right, so now that we've done this, we remember that even though if I signed out as Bob Roberts, I don't have the appropriate permissions. If I go to machine orders, I don't have permission to view these records. It's not exactly the best experience. We want to limit even showing this machine orders page to only specific users. So let's expand on how we can do that. So once again, I'm in the design studio and I'm going to go to my machine orders page. I'm going to slip the little ellipsis to the side here. And then what I want to do is go to that page settings. I'm going to choose this and go to permissions. And here I want to specify who can see this page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose that. And now I'm going to choose that only authenticated users are allowed to see that page. If I click OK here and set that up, now let's preview this site. And now that we're back into the site, we notice that we no longer have access to that particular page. It's now been removed from the main menu. And that's what setting up page permissions tends to do. Even if we were to put in the URL of that page and go to it, it is still going to prompt us to log in and not allow us to view that page because it needs to be viewed only by authenticated users.